Okay, welcome to Creating Fertile Spaces for Newcomers. And why do I say creating fertile spaces? This is my mantra because I think our overarching goal as educators is not to deliver instruction or cover curriculum or meet standards. If we focus there, we're missing the point. What we need to do is create fertile spaces. And if we know how to do that, the rest will fall into place. And so I'm going to be talking today about what it looks like to create fertile spaces for a particular group of students that is increasing all over the world. And that is due to displacement of families from their countries of origin, and they find themselves in new places. And they are referred to as newcomers. And they go into programs and services at any age in any location. And many of them come from a background that is very different from the one that they are finding when they get here, in my case, to the US. So let's take a dive into what the problem is. The statement of the problem, which is very well articulated by Reyes in 2023, is that there's a weak scheduling design process that either over-shelters the newcomers and keeps them for too long in these special programs and doesn't let them get out into the rest of the school to meet all of the other students, or it aggressively mainstreams them and they get into situations and classrooms where they have no idea what's going on and they're lost and they never really feel comfortable or catch up. So this is the constant tension. This is a statement of our problem for newcomers. And my proposed solution, don't worry, I've got one, is to strike a balance between the two extremes. They're both well-intentioned, but they're not effective in keeping the students in school, keeping them from dropping out, because a lot of them do, and moving them towards completing, which a lot of them don't. Even if they stay, they don't necessarily get their diploma. So what is the solution? It's called the mutually adaptive learning paradigm. And it provides support for the transition from the newcomer context to the mainstream context. Now, before I show you the paradigm, I have to get you ready for it. Because what we have, without knowing it, is what's called paradigm blindness. We only see our own view of the world and our own view of the educational system. But these students are coming with a different worldview and they've had different learning experiences. We've got to open the blinders and see all of that they're bringing. And that's what I'm going to help you do. So we need a theory. It's called schema theory. Now, I have another presentation, if anyone's interested, that goes in much more detail with a lot of little games and activities to teach you about schema theory. But in this very brief presentation, I'm just going to choose one piece that you really need if you're going to understand MALP. So we'll start with a definition. Schema is an abstract structure representing concepts stored in memory. You have it stored up there and you can access it when you need to do it. For example, the alphabet, the Latin alphabet, is stored in your brain, not the Cyrillic alphabet, not Chinese characters, right? Those are different schemata of language. So there are three types of schema. One is linguistic. I just gave you an example. The other is content. So if you know the condensation process, you know it, right? You learn things in school. If you know the concept of buoyancy, you know that. I'm picking science concepts, but it could be any content, right? So you have schemata that you build over time. And the third one, which is the one people are least familiar with, and it's the main one that I'm going to focus on for you, is formal schemata. And it has to do with how things happen, how you expect things to happen. Not the language or the content of the instruction. In our case, we're talking about instruction, but how instruction takes place and how things are laid out in this new society that newcomers are coming to. And I'm going to give you an example. And you are going to show me that you can do this. This is an activity, and it's obviously in another language. I'm going to blow it up a little bit. Now, even though you don't know this language, I'm assuming, I don't know if I have a ringer here that does, but you probably know what this is. Maybe not exactly what it is, but in general, you have a formal schema that will tell you what you're looking at and what you're supposed to do with it. So if you could please share in the chat anything you know about what I'm showing you here. It would be a piece of paper if it was in front of you on a table. So just put in the chat anything at all, no wrong answers. What do you notice? What makes sense to you that this is? What is it? What are you supposed to do with it? What do you notice about it? Please put in the chat. I'll drink some water while you do that. Okay, so for those people watching the recording, people are putting in the chat that it's a form. You know it's a form, and you know that you're supposed to fill it out because you've seen 100 forms before. Also, you might know that it's asking for your contact information in the chat someone has put, because it has certain words and blanks, and you have to fill information in the blanks. And the words, if you see them, some of them are cognates, which means a similar word to English. Okay, so if you see words that are date, D-A-T-E, might be even the same as date, you get an idea. Name, date, information. And even more than that, someone has written in the chat that it looks like a registration form, and that's what it is. You have to look at the check boxes to see you're making choices and you're giving information regarding places and times. This is going to be a school registration form. And if you look at the symbol on the upper left, you can tell what kind of school it might be if you're familiar with that symbol. And somebody might put that in the chat, that if you've seen these images before, you might notice that it's a fish, and it's probably a religious school, a Christian school, which it is. A fish and a cross, it is religious. So thank you for playing along with me. And what is the point? Well, the point is you have these schemata. You already know when you see this what it is. But many newcomers are given forms and being asked to do things. They don't have any idea that the line means fill it out. And they certainly may not have the language background. But even though you don't have the language background, you're compensating for that by imposing all the schemata that you already have for forms and filling them out and different types of forms. Okay, so this is a key point. Put a pin in this because you're going to need it later in the presentation. So what happens with curriculum, instruction, and assessment for newcomers? What happens is if they do not have the schemata, remember, they're new to language. They may very well be new to the content they're learning, right? And they're going to be new to our way of teaching, right? Our formal schema of school. So they're not going to be able to access the curriculum. They're not going to be able to benefit from the instruction, and they're not going to be succeeding on our assessments. And so we need to understand this unfamiliar schemata as an issue for them, and we need to address it. So we have some assumptions of formal education. You have to start with yourself before you're going to understand the newcomer. So let's start with ourselves. What are we assuming? And I gave you the example of the form, but now we're going to go into the classroom. So teachers and learners assume, right? Teachers and learners assume. I don't know why it's not giving my actual, this is supposed to show the next item on my, I see why. It's me. I was clicking in the room where you are instead of up on my PowerPoint. The goals of instruction are to produce an independent learner and prepare the learner for life after schooling. This is true. We know this, right? We want them to be independent, and we're getting them ready for life, right? School, and then they'll be launched. Okay, and the learner is ready to participate and demonstrate mastery on an individual basis. They know they'll be accountable individually. They got to show what they're learning, and they've got to participate. And they know they're going to have something to do with literacy-based classroom tasks. They know that in school, you don't do the same thing as you do on the playground or home with your family. So this is what we assume about school. Now, I'm going to show you this same slide in 10 minutes. And when I show you this slide in 10 minutes, you're going to see that none of this applies to the newcomers, most of the newcomers. This doesn't apply to them. None of this makes any sense to them. And yet for us, it's the most natural thing in the world. So let's go on a little journey. First, I want you to look at this object and tell me what you associate with it. What do you think about this? Not what is it, we know what it is, but what is your association with it when you see it? What do you think about it? Now, you might have one association or more than one. But the way we think and learn is shaped by prior experiences. So because you've seen something similar to this before, you have an idea in your head where it belongs, right? And this is another metaphor. I believe in teaching through metaphor. And so instead of only giving you the direct information, I'm trying to get you to use metaphors in order to get and grasp the ideas that I'm teaching. So I see in the chat, people are giving their associations. There's no wrong answers, okay? These are your associations, all right? So let's look at what it could be. It could be decor or a souvenir, or it could be a place of prayer. And that's reflected in the chat. In fact, in the chat, people are indicating that they have multiple associations, not just one, right? But what is the point here? I'm trying, like I said at the very beginning, you need to open your paradigm blinders, and you need to realize there are other ways to look at the world than your way, okay? And we're going to need that metaphor to help us understand MALP, which I'm going to show you as the way to proceed. So here are 3 underlying differences, and I use the iceberg because when you think of culture, you might think of clothing and music and art, but we're going deeper than that. And those things are wonderful, but we're talking in the world of education. So what are the 3 underlying differences that really matter for these newcomers? One is orality versus literacy. Many of them have interrupted schooling, limited schooling. They think in terms of oral. They don't think in terms of literacy necessarily. And many of them are older, they're adolescents, and they're new to reading and writing. And the second is collectivism and individualism. If you haven't heard these terms, I'm going to explain them briefly. But our society is very individualistic. The US depends on where you are in the world. I know this is an international conference, but Most of the world's cultures are collectivistic, very different. And third, most of these newcomers have had informal ways of learning, not necessarily formal education. Now, if you have newcomers in your school who are highly educated and have already studied languages and gone to school for years, they will have a much quicker runway to success. But that's not generally who's coming today. Who's coming today are war-torn students who have experienced violence and they have trauma and they have been in camps and other places before they come, and their issues are severe in terms of adapting to our system. And that is who I focus on because that's where the problem lies. All right. What is this? This is not a trick question. What is it? Not a trick. Just put in the chat what it is. Okay, so everyone put a circle. It's a circle, of course. Now, I want you to think in 3 dimensions. If it's 3-dimensional and it's an object, what could it be? No wrong answers. Sure, people are putting different things, a sphere, a ball, a globe, absolutely. Now, notice how quickly you went from 2-dimensional to 3. You started with 2, and then you went to 3. Well, these students will think first 3-dimensional. They won't go to the word circle because they're thinking about the real world. They relate to objects, and we don't know exactly which object they put, but that's not the point. They will do the third 3-dimension first. And then if you say, but this is a shape, you have to teach that. So let me show you what you do. So here, if you look at this, what do you think? Now there is an answer. What's the answer? What is it? What is it? It's an apple, but of course it's not. It's a line drawing. Now, will these students identify it as an apple? No, it's a bunch of lines. How about this? This is better. It's artistic. It has nice shading. We would identify it again as an apple, but these students, not necessarily. It isn't really an apple. It's a drawing. Let's try this one. Oh, now it's a photograph. That's much more realistic. It's an image. It's a visual that really looks like an apple, but it's a photograph. How about this? Ah, now there's a photo cut in half and in color, and they can really see the apple. So we're getting a lot closer. Now, the point here is, first of all, if you do have newcomers, photographs are better than art or line drawings. You need to teach them those, though, because they're going to see them in a lot of their classroom materials. But you know what really works best? Oh, boy, what's this? Tell me what this is. Oh, apple. Oh, no. Great. My favorite part of the presentation. I get to eat the apple. Okay. Anyway, they will identify with this. Why? 5 senses. You can see it, you can touch it, you can taste it, you can smell it, and you can hear me crunch. Oh, real objects. So what is this point I'm trying to make? And again, we're talking somewhat in metaphors because we're really talking about literacy. The ultimate 2-dimensional transition is to literacy. And when you think about it, literacy is necessary in our society. You can't go through life successfully with only oral. You need reading and writing. Look, here are these quotes. The most importance I have learned about the United States, that is a book, newspapers, or notebooks and pens, these things are always let me know how to live here. Notice it says how to live here, not just go to school here, right? So this student, I didn't change what they wrote, okay? And then the next student, that was my student. And the next one is my colleague's student. I never care about reading until I come here. In my country, nothing to read. But here, everywhere, print, words, signs, and books, and you have to read. Okay, so this is huge for the newcomers. We have to work with them on reading. Now, the second big difference is collectivism versus individualism. So collectivism, they're trying to form a web. They're trying to be interconnected. When they do something, it's for the benefit of the group. Even if they win something in competition in athletics or art or anything, it's always, oh, this brings honor to my group, my family, my country. It's not about individual achievement. And when we do group work, you might say, oh, we do cooperative learning. But even when we do group work, we say, you have this job, you're the note taker, you're the group leader. We're always separating people and being individual. On our end, it's always about raise your hand, give the answer, do your own work, eyes on your own paper, and you're supposed to display your knowledge as an individual learner. For collectivistic students, which most of these are, it doesn't matter who gives the teacher the answer, as long as the teacher gets the answer. And it doesn't matter who does what in the group, because as a group, we produce the project together, the product. And it's a very different worldview. Guess what? 70% of this is research by Triandis, Hofstede. All of this is research-based. And in my book, actually, I have 3 books. This is most recent, last year. Anyway, in collectivistic societies, 70% of the world's cultures. And it's a continuum, so it's not a dichotomy. Sometimes, it's easy for us to make a dichotomy here, but it's really a continuum. But the United States is way far on the individual end. And many of these students, whether they're Somali or Salvadoran or Syrian or Afghani, you name it, they come from collectivistic cultures. They think we're nuts here, just parenthetically. Very academic language I just used. Okay. So the third one, it's a small group, so I feel free to joke around a bit. Okay. And the end of the day, too. The sun is streaming in behind me as it goes down slowly. All right. And the third difference is ways of learning. So here they are informally learning at the time that it's going to help them. They learn parallel to life. She's weaving. She looks pretty young, but she's ready. You see the adult's hand guiding her. She's learning. She's getting mentored. She's getting feedback. She's contributing to her community in that moment. And what do? We have special buildings and special classrooms that we create with different age groups and different subjects, and we divide everything up and we move people through year by year by year, lockstep, right? 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. All right. So you see the difference between informal learning and formal education. Now, this is pretty intuitive, but what I need to show you is something that I don't think is being talked about enough, which is, what is formal education actually? What it really is decontextualized tasks based on academic ways of thinking. That's a mouthful, but I'm going to show you what it means, okay? It's a certain type of thinking that we do and certain kinds of tasks that we give students that only happens in school. All right. Definitions. What is a tree? Now, if you're a newcomer and you come here and the teacher says, what's a tree? You say, well, why are you asking me? Don't you know what a tree is? Or they might just point out the window, right there, teacher. Or they might say a tree is for shade. We do this interactively if we have more time. A tree is for building something or nutrition. I can get fruit or nuts. Okay. They would give functional definitions. That's not what the teacher's looking for. The teacher's looking for, it's a large plant with branches and a trunk and, an actual school-based definition. All right. So There they are, deer in the headlights, so to speak. True, false. They love this. They think we're tricking them. Paris is the capital of France. Bravo. New York City is the capital of the US. Sorry. Thanks for playing. Okay. But their attitude is, why don't you just tell me what's true and I'll learn that? Here I am trying to learn English and learn to read, and you're confusing me, teacher, and tricking me by putting sentences that are not true. Again, paradigm blindness. Don't be blind. See another way of looking at what we do. Now, it doesn't mean don't ask for definitions and don't do true false, but that's the curriculum. That's what we need to teach. We need to teach them how to build the kind of definitions we're looking for. We need to teach them. And in my book, this one, or actually, I think it's in this one, we have 4 pages, how to teach true false, step by step. Yes, all of this is in the work that I've done. My life's work. And the third is classification. And even this, when you see it, is for little children. If I have any parents here, aunts, uncles, you recognize what this is. What's important here? It's not the colors. What's important here? What does the little kid have to do? Boop, 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 boop. They have to sort the shapes. Exactly. And the chat has the answer, yes. That's about shapes. So classifying, even when they're very little, we teach them that. Now I'm going to give you a test to see if you understood academic ways of thinking based on decontextualized tasks. Let's see if you get the point. Here is a little sample test for you, and I do need you to put the answer in the chat, and we'll see what you put. I'm going to give you a group of objects. It's easy, don't worry. You'll get it. What's the group? 3 of the objects belong to a group, and one of them you're going to get rid of because it doesn't fit in the group. And this is a time-tested research project done by Luria years ago, and it comes out the same every time. Here are the objects. So 3 of them are, what are they? 3 of them are, put it in the chat. Excellent. 3 of them. I've got smart people here. Okay, it's tools. So we have to get rid of that piece of wood or log. But now you're going to be a newcomer. If you're a newcomer and you're in the real world and you reason contextually, not decontextually, this is out of context. We're just showing you these tools on a log. But in the real world, nobody does that. In the real world, people do real things. So is the newcomer going to get rid of the log and keep the tools? Is the newcomer going to do that? Well, the answer is no. The newcomer needs the wood. Then they're going to figure one of those tools we'll get rid of. And we could talk for hours about which one and why, but that's not the point. The point is they're going to get it wrong. Not just this question, but all the questions that rely on decontextualization, because they reason in context. And all of our testing takes place out of context, not in the real world. This is perhaps the most important slide for understanding the MALP model that I'm going to show you, because we need to teach them decontextualized tasks. We need to teach them academic ways of thinking. So what is the decontextualized task here? It's multiple choice. And what is the academic way of thinking? Categorization. There it is. That's the essence of formal education and the essence of assessment. Now you might say, oh, we do project-based learning. Okay, in fact, MALP is project-based learning, and I advocate project-based learning. But when the pedal meets the metal, they're going to have to take standardized tests. And standardized tests have no mercy. So do you remember the 3 underlying differences? The three underlying differences. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to show them to you. But I like to do retrieval practice, which is very good to do for lower level Bloom work, right? Comprehension and retention is nothing to sniff at. We don't only do the higher order. So think if you can recall the three major differences that I just talked about. The first one was orality versus literacy. The second was collectivism versus individualism. And the third was informal ways of learning versus formal education. And now I'm going to give you another job. And all of this I do in workshops and professional development. This is a very condensed version of workshops I do that last 1 day, 2 days, depending, what the district needs. So I'm going to show you this same. Remember I told you we'd show you the same slide? Here it is again. Now, you tell me, what do you see here? What about orality versus literacy? We are saying none of this resonates with them, right? So do you see anything that talks about orality versus literacy? Well, maybe you were able to pick out the word literacy-based. So literacy-based is what we do in school, and they're not going to be comfortable with that. They prefer oral transmission of knowledge. They've learned orally all their lives. Okay, now, what about collectivism versus individualism? What do we see here that's based on the individual person? One person, not the group. There's a couple. We have mastery on an individual basis and produce an independent learner. Yes, the chat is really hot. It's happening in the chat. Now, what about the formal education versus informal? What is different here? It's not informal because we know that it has things just for school, right? First of all, we have classroom tasks. And secondly, it's life after schooling. And they learn during their lives. It's parallel, and ours is sequential, preparing for life after schooling. So do you see how our basic assumptions just don't resonate with newcomers? So now that I've got you kind of depressed, here's the name of the problem. It's called cultural dissonance. You've heard of cognitive dissonance. Well, we call this cultural dissonance. Okay, that's the problem. And that's the problem we have to address. Everyone thinks, oh, they'll learn English and they'll be fine. No. And then they don't do well and we say, oh, it's because they don't have the ability. No, it's cultural dissonance. And we have paradigm blindness, or we'd be able to solve it better. But I'm here to take off the blinders. Let's go. So the essential question we ask ourselves is, there has to be an essential question. What can we do to reduce the cultural dissonance, but at the same time foster learning in this new setting? What do we do? Well, my answer is we do MALP, Adapt Lesson Delivery. MALP, Mutually Adaptive Learning Paradigm. Now, if you look at this, you can tell what we're doing here. We're going to take our paradigm and their paradigm and mix them together. So they're adapting to us, but we're adapting to them. And we're going to make a mix, but it isn't random. It's very carefully research-based. And so that is where I'm coming from, all right? And when we do MALP, here's what we're doing. We're creating culturally responsive, sustaining education. We're taking elements from the student's learning paradigm, elements from formal education, and it's a transitional approach to address what's called an achievement gap. I don't even like that term, by focusing on the cultural dissonance, okay? So it's just for the newcomer, all right? After that, once they get the idea, and they've learned these decontextualized tests, they've learned these academic ways of thinking, they've learned how to do things as an individual, not just collectively. And when they've really mastered the basics of literacy and are comfortable using literacy, they can go into all the other programs and go into the mainstream and go into the advanced English learner classes, okay? So this is a temporary measure, but if you're not doing it, they're never going to catch up, in my view. So now I put the two paradigms. Now, in workshops, I give them little worksheets and envelopes, and they have to create this. So you can try and do it in your own head, but I've got to put it on the slide for you. So what goes on the left and what goes on the right? We're going to look at the two paradigms. Here we go. We're taking things from the bottom. Took an hour to make this slide. We're going to take things from the bottom and put them up where they go. So look at the left. It says conditions, processes, and activities. I need to explain that to you, or you'd be a little lost with how to do this. So I divide learning into three. The conditions you need for learning to take place. In other words, it won't happen if you don't have these conditions in place. Processes is how you expect to interact with new material and how you expect to receive new material. Activities are what you expect to do to get better at something and to demonstrate that you have ability in that way, that you can now perform, okay? So conditions, processes, and activities. And the left is going to be the opposite of the right, of course. You know that by now. You spend this time with me, 30 minutes, you've got to know that. So here we go, guys. Conditions. Well, the first condition is immediate relevance, because they learn things when they need to learn them. They need immediate relevance. If it's not relevant now, they're gone. They're out the door. For us, it's all about the future. The test next week. 3rd grade goes to 4th grade, right? You'll need it when you graduate. Oh, how about college and career readiness? We love to talk about that. What does that have to do with today? That's why some of them drop out and go and get a job and do landscaping or whatever they can find, because that's going to be immediately relevant, right? Because it gives them food on the table, etc. All right. Now, interconnectedness. Remember, they're making a web. That's very important to them. If they don't feel interconnected, then they're not happy in the classroom. And I have examples of students who've told me that they're happy when they get to know me as a person and they know the other students really well. But for us, it's all about being independent. Independence is our goal. We're not thinking that much. Interconnected is fine, and let's have a relationship, but we want you to be independent. It's a different focus. Remember, we're talking about paradigms here. And again, it's all a continuum. It's not dichotomies, but it's much easier this way for our brain. Okay, those are the conditions. Processes, you know, they prefer oral transmission, which isn't just speaking, but more like Homer or the Bible, with a lot of redundancy built in and memorable phrases. That's what they're used to. That's how they do storytelling in their cultures, and they hand down traditions generation to generation. All oral. It's amazing that they do that, but it's all preserved orally. And for us, it's the written word, not just reading and writing per se, but to demonstrate learning. Now, they share responsibility, as I said before, collectivistic. And for us, we do the sharing now and then for low stakes, but all the high stakes are individual. Think about low and high stakes, right? Okay, and the individual, and the activities, pragmatic tasks based on sociocultural experiences versus our old favorite and now familiar to you, decontextualized tasks based on academic ways of thinking. These are the two paradigms, okay? It's important to understand. And if you just look on the right, you only see ours, and that's paradigm blindness. Now I've helped you You don't have it anymore because you see the other side. But there's one more thing I need to show you if my PowerPoint cooperates. And if you just look at these things here, that box, what does that remind you of? You may think of it and you may not. It's okay. Some people think of it right away and other people don't get it. But if you look at those things, what does that telegraph to you right away? We have such a chat today. I am very impressed. Yes, this is standardized testing. So are you saying there's an achievement gap? Because I'm not. I'm saying there's cultural dissonance. And the reason they don't do well on standardized testing has much more to do with the paradigm they're coming from and how it conflicts with the paradigm in our system than it has to do with whether they know answers or not. Okay? Because they'll argue with you about the answers and tell you, no, we need the log, right? We need the log. See? Yeah, there you go. And they know all about a tree. They know more about a tree than you do because they've lived with these trees all their lives. And you tell them that their definition is not, yeah, I think you get the point. All right. So now that you have a problem, the two paradigms, and what are we going to do? All right. So now you finally get the model. Okay. If you stayed for 40 minutes, you get to see MALP. And remember when I told you that I couldn't show it to you, I had to prepare you because you wouldn't necessarily grasp the concepts behind it. So here we go. This is now MALP. Accept conditions for learning. You will try, and I have examples to the extent that we have time. You will try to make some of your teaching each day immediately relevant so they see something right away. And you will build the web in your class, a learning community of interconnectedness. And you will stop talking about the future and you will stop talking about being independent because that means nothing to them. They're not interested. That's your agenda, not theirs. Now, we're going to combine the processes, but we're going to do it for low stakes and high stakes, back and forth and back and forth. We are going to incorporate their processes, but also gradually get them transitioned to understand the importance of individual accountability and the written word so that they can succeed in our system. But we have to do that combination. So when we do MALP projects, you will see how the MALP projects combine these. And then the last piece, this is the tough part. We are not going to look at those pragmatic tasks based on lived experiences. No. What we are going to do is we are going to intentionally teach, not just practice. And I have people take the MALP training and they don't get this point, so I'm going to emphasize it. It's not about doing the tasks and doing the thinking. We already do that. It's about introducing the tasks and teaching them and teaching the academic ways of thinking. We have to teach it because it's new. It's not just about practicing. And what you have to do, if you look on the left here, look what I added. Target unfamiliar activities, which are over on the right there. But look what we're going to use. Familiar language and content. And remember when I told you to remember schema theory in order to understand MALP? This is schema theory. So what we're doing here is we're balancing the schemata. So remember the schemata were linguistic, content, and formal. So in this case, because all three are unfamiliar, they're learning English, they're learning the curriculum of school, the content, and they're learning how to do school. So what MALP does is MALP uses familiar schemata, either their own, well, I'm going to show you, it's on the next slide. I used to just explain this and then I realized I needed another slide. So here it is. Here's what I mean by the familiar schemata. You are going to use familiar language with them, home language or dialect. And it doesn't mean you have to have that, but you can have others in the room or materials in the room, other languages that they speak, and English at the independent level. They may know some English, whatever English they already know. So you're going to use familiar language. Don't try and teach them new language when you're trying to teach them true, false. All right? True, false. Do I have a sister? Do you have a brother? Right? Okay. Familiar content. So we're going to use their funds of knowledge. I'm sure you've heard of that term. And if not, you can look it up. Louis Moll and others. Use their sociocultural experiences, and maybe they mastered some subject matter content. The more you know about what they already know, the more you can leverage their familiar language and content while you're doing your MALP projects. So I have 2 quick MALP projects in the last few minutes here. I'm going to show you an elementary and a secondary. So the elementary is Renee. And she had a 2nd grade class and she had to do a nonfiction unit. So she did a welcome book and it was so sweet. Each student in her class made their own cover. So that's individual, right? And it was this, she said, just make a picture of our school. And some of them had writing on it more than others, okay? And then each student made a page and they made the same book. There were maybe 25 kids in the class. She made 25 copies. Each one had a different cover, but they all had the same pages. But here's the table of contents. She's teaching them nonfiction unit, right? So what does the book have to have? A cover, a table of contents. But the table of contents is how to do things. And I don't know if I may not have this big enough for you. I'm sorry. But I'm sorry. I want to go back. I want to go back up. Okay, so this one on the left is sharpen your pencil. And it's sequential and has little drawings. Remember I said you have to teach them about drawings? Well, if they draw it, they're getting that in their head about drawings. And it has sequential words. First, my pencil's broken. Next, I sharpen my pencil. Then my pencil's sharp. Last, I'm writing. And the other one is much more advanced. You can see longer sentences, more complex pictures. They're all at different levels, but each one does a page. And they had this stack of books. And think of how wonderful that is, because when other newcomers come, they get the newcomer book. And what a wonderful book to greet them. And we have an article about this project, and it's also in our book. So Renee's project is in the book, and there's an article in an academic journal showing this project. And this is Renee. And the word SLIFE I haven't used, but that stands for Students with Limited or Interrupted Formal Education. And she said it's good for all of her English learners to do MALP projects, okay? And the secondary, I'll do very quickly. We just have time to show you the secondary. This is Carol's social studies class, and she's doing the Civil War, right? How do you do the Civil War? Well, you know, the students in their countries, it's not a pleasant topic, but they may have experience. So she's leveraging that, but she's also leveraging immediate relevance here. So what she wants to do is teach them about Venn diagrams and help them to understand that it's a graphic organizer they need to learn. They're not just practicing it, they're learning it. Remember, Renee was teaching what a nonfiction book has to have. By the way, they had a glossary at the end. I can't tell you everything, there's not time, but there's much more. Okay, so they did a bar graph. They were learning how to do a bar graph, but what is it about? It's about how they spend their free time. And they did a survey in the class of how they all spend their free time, and then they made a bar graph about it. But notice the content and language is familiar to them. What they're learning new is the bar graph. Why are they learning the bar graph? Because they then went to a website that talked about the Civil War soldiers and what they do in their free time. And then she had them make a Venn diagram, what the soldiers do, what we do, and what do we both do? So for example, pray and sleep and listen to music, and there were things that went in the middle. Notice she's teaching what's a Venn diagram. They don't know, but they learn about the Civil War soldiers and they learn about each other, interconnectedness. It has all the elements of MALP. This was a MALP project. And oh, I have it a little bigger. There it is. Okay. And then she had them do a web quest. She wanted them to learn about Abraham Lincoln. But first, she had them learn about a famous person from their country. And she gave them a list of questions. And again, I think I've got this going bigger. I hope I do. Yeah. So anyway, you can't. But this is Tekun Oman. He's a Quiche hero from Guatemala. And these are indigenous. She had indigenous students. And they knew this great hero, but they'd never studied the hero. They didn't know to go online and ask and answer questions and put them on a piece of paper. So she's teaching them about web quests and questions and answers, but about somebody they already know, their hero from their country. Then she does Abraham Lincoln. Okay. So I think you get the flavor. Oh, and there's the statue. And I went there. I was there in January and I saw that statue. Yes, I'm very proud of having gone to where my students are from, because I think that's important too. So she saw more confidence in her students and they were encouraged to take responsibility, proud of their work and what they achieved. So they're making the transition to our paradigm. It works, guys. This works. And we have a teacher planning checklist. If you look at this, it maps right on to MALP. And if you do these things, accept conditions, combine processes, target new activities, you use this, and it's all on our website and in our books. Okay. So I want you to reframe the conversation from achievement gap to cultural dissonance. And this slide is very conceptual, and I'm not going to do the slide with you because we don't have time, but I'm trying to show that we need to put a layer in for these students that maybe you didn't need when you went to school. And this is a very conceptual slide, but if you're interested, I can give you much more about what this slide is trying to show, but we don't have time. So in any case, this one is very important. Because we don't have a deficit view. Remember the paradigm blindness, because now we see the other paradigm. We see them coming from a different paradigm. They're coming towards us, and we just need to use MALP to help those newcomers. And I think we return to the problem, and you can see how MALP is the balance. That was the problem I showed you in the beginning. And these are the books we have and the website. I can put in the chat our website, and these are our books. Second editions of most of the books have come out now. And this is a poem by that same student who wrote about notebooks let me know how to live here. And I like to end with this. This is the last slide. This is his poem that he wrote. It took him an hour and a half. I'll let you read it. Isn't it beautiful? Notice every line starts with E, and he's really made the transition from his paradigm to ours. Yeah, he really did. He made that transition. Of course, he called it poetry, but it should be poetry, right? English. Okay, thanks, folks. And I put in the chat my website, and I put the email address where you can reach me. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm just going to end by sharing my website so you can see it. This is the website. That's what it looks like. Okay. So when you can go to the website. It has all about it. It also has my presentation area from yesterday, SOFLA. I do technology training as well. Training, books, resources, contact us. It's a great website. Enjoy it. And thank you very much.